In the 1960s, Mexican Americans made up the majority of the population of South Texas. Most were migrant farm workers, poor, with little education. After picking the winter crops, many of them travel across America in search of yet another harvest.
This part of the country has been built on the backs of the Mexican Americans. So you had every bit as much segregation, unequal education, and so forth as the African American did in the Deep South.
The few wealthy landowners were Anglo. The huge majority of the population was locked into a labor pool of just reserve labor.
In Crystal City, where Jose Angel Gutierrez grew up in the 1940s and 50s, Mexican Americans accounted for 85% of the population, but they had no political representation. For years, Mexican Americans had been denied the right to vote by obstacles like poll taxes, literacy tests, and gerrymandered voting districts.
You take a county where we might be the majority of the population. Well, what the Anglo establishment had done was to divide the county in such a way that it was simply impossible for Mexican Americans to really gain political power.
We had the poll tax back then. Most people did not have the money, and if they did, they had the sense not to spend it on the privilege of voting, because it was always white candidates, and that was always the results.
In the history of oppression of Mexicanos or Chicanos in the United States, Texas was probably the worst. You have more of a history of conflict. You have more of a history of land grabbing, outright land grabbing. You have more of a history of just outright physical oppression of the Mexican population in Texas. In fact, in the 20s, the New York Times had an editorial that's saying that the indiscriminate killing of Mexicans in Texas had reached the proportions of being a scandal.
The Texas Rangers were created in 1823 to protect settlers from outlaws. They had a reputation for intimidation and violence toward Mexican Americans.
I was coming up Military Road with Colonel Hickok, and they came to some big mesquite trees, and there was 4 Mexicans hanging by the neck. The colonel says, "Peavy, I guess the Rangers have been through here."
In the face of this frontier justice, terrorized Mexican Americans were reluctant to fight for their civil rights.
Down there, law enforcement was used for private purposes. They were acting as a private police force for some of those farmers.
Jose Angel Gutierrez began organizing the Mexican Americans in Crystal City, determined to win back the government that had been denied Los Cinco.
He was at the right place at the right time. We all needed change, but we weren't quite sure how to go about it.
Gutierrez targeted the schools where young people were fed up with negative stereotypes.
Every time in our history books they talked about Mexicanos, it was about the Mexicano bandido, you know, all the bad things the Mexicanos did. And we were seen as lazy. I still remember seeing in the history books the Mexicano with his sombrero over the top and being asleep. And that's what we had to deal with, the image that they had of us there. And that was projected onto us, and it was hard to overcome that image that they had.
With a boycott imminent, organizers hoped to get parents involved.
We went and asked the men to support us, and of course said no, because if they came, they would kill all these principals and teachers and whatnot. And they said, well, go see the vieja, take the wife, they'll do it. So we took the wife, and the wife was thrown out summarily from the school board. So then we went back to them and said, they threw your wife out, guy. You know, and they're saying your daughter's ugly. She can't be a cheerleader. They only want the pretty ones with the white legs. Now, there's no father who thinks he's got an ugly daughter. The school board insulted them too. So they had no way out. They said, you know, you kids are right. Mama, you're right. I mean, they don't listen to anybody. They won't even listen to us. So you do what you got to do. So the kids started chanting and screaming, walk out, walk out, walk out.
On December 9th, 1969, 700 students walked out of Crystal City High School. Representatives of the United States Department of Justice intervened to mediate the crisis. The school board agreed to all of the demands. 3 months later, Diana Palacios was voted head cheerleader of Crystal City's varsity squad. Building on this success, Mexican Americans in Crystal City created their own political party, La Raza Unida, the United People.
We no longer accept the fact that we are powerless and need to be complaining about our powerlessness. We know we're powerful. We know we can be organized. We know we can triumph. We know that our destiny is not tied to holes in the fields, but tied to much greater and loftier goals and levels.
There's about 30 or 35% of the Mexican American here in Zavala County that vote for the Raza, and the other 60 or 70% are not voting or afraid to vote.
Why are they afraid to vote?
They are afraid of harassment and intimidation.
But in fact, Crystal City leaders couldn't stop the Raza Unida party, which was gaining support throughout Texas.